A study by the Kentucky Distillers Association found that the Kentucky bourbon industry contributes $8.6 billion into the state's economy annually. Our next guest is a distiller that ages his bourbon a little differently than his competitors. Joining us now is Trey Zoeller, founder of Jefferson's Bourbon. So Trey, you guys actually age yours on a ship. Tell us a little bit about the process that you go through, when making your bourbon.
So we actually make a number of different types of Jefferson's bourbon, but our ocean bourbon we do age on ships. And I happen to be on a friend of mine's ship that's now called the O-Search. At the time it was called Ocean. And he catches, tags, and releases great white sharks. And we spent our 40th birthday down on his ship, catching some sharks, doing a little surfing, but drinking a lot of bourbon. And as we sat on the bow of the ship, I watched the bourbon rock back and forth within the barrel. And I thought in the bottle. I thought if this was happening in a bottle, it would happen in a barrel, and that would change the maturation process. As typically, bourbon sits in a barrel in Kentucky and waits for the temperatures to change to really start the aging process. So this would force it on a quick basis.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not an expert in terms of the language, the vocabulary that one uses to describe their various bourbon tastes, but how would you say that the ocean varietal works against your traditionally aged products?
People call it the salted caramel popcorn bourbon.
Okay.
So you can
taste that.
We're not set up for a tasting here, but I'm just going to have.
You know what? You got a cup right there, and it's open. So
guys,
why not?
You guys get some.
All right, so you can taste the salt a little bit
actually,
in there.
The barrels breathe, and so it breathes in the salt air.
Yeah.
And actually, we cross the equator 4 times, and as we do that, that
You got an empty cup there?
caramelizes sugars within the wood.
Okay.
So that's why you get the salted caramel.
So how long is it aging at sea?
So what we do is we distill it and age it in Kentucky, and age it for 8 years there.
Okay.
And then we put it on ships, and it goes to 30 different countries,
Okay.
5 continents, and crosses the equator 4 times before coming back.
How is the bourbon business overall?
Bourbon is in a complete boom right now. It's
Still?
It still is, yeah. And actually, I think we've got a long way to go within it. We've really grown the category. I've been in the business. We just celebrated our 20th year. When I started in the business, it was in a 30-year decline. In the last 10 years, it's really just exploded. And people are finding out what goes into bourbon and how you can manipulate it one way or the other. And they're really geeking out about it. And people love to share those stories of how you manipulate it one way or the other. So it really separates itself.
Hint of mackerel, I would say.
There you go.
So how does this speed the aging process? Does it intensify the aging process? What?
It does a little bit of both. Some people say it accelerates it, and it does. Actually, it's really going back to how bourbon came to life in the first place. People started distilling in Kentucky because they were forced past the Appalachian Mountains due to the first whiskey tax. And to bring it to market, they put it on flatboats and floated it down to New Orleans, then put it on ships and sailed it around Florida and back up the East Coast. And we basically did that same process about 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it took 18 months from the time that we distilled it to the time we landed in New York. And that bourbon that came out of the barrel at that time was as dark as a 16-year-old bourbon. So it does.
In 18 months?
In 18 months. And it was the smoothest.
That's just from sloshing around.
Correct. It really transformed whiskey into bourbon for the first time, because it's not bourbon until it hits the wood. And once that maturation process starts, and as you said, it accelerates it and it really intensifies it and brings out a lot of different flavors that take years to come out when typically aging in Kentucky or anywhere else.
So is that lower costs for you?
No, it's higher costs. As I said, we age it.
You have a boat.
Well, we've got to put it on ships, which are very expensive, but we age it in Kentucky for 8 years first. When you age bourbon, you lose a lot to evaporation. So we lose about 3 to 4% in Kentucky. So we've lost quite a bit by the time we put it on the ships. And then that humidity out at sea and all that rocking, we really amplify that angel share is what it's called. So we lose over 50% of our yield before it comes back and we have to bottle it up.
Now, you talk about a booming industry, certainly a lot of competition in that space right now, or do you not see it that way? When you go into a liquor store and you see, 40 different bourbons on the shelf now, to you, is that, well, there's a lot of different options, or does that mean it's taking away from the vodka area or the gin area.
It is, and that's what we want to do. We want to, I'm talking on behalf of the bourbon category.
Sure.
We want to steal market share from vodkas and gins and scotches. And all ships rise with a rising tide, and that's exactly what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen consolidation in the space? I mean, in Kentucky right now, what's the feel like? How many different, are there new folks cropping up? Or are you seeing some bigger guys coming in trying to consolidate some
A little bit of both.
guys? Yeah.
So when I started in the industry, there were 8 distillers making bourbon that made all the bourbon. Today, there's thousands of distilleries across the country. Mm-hmm. So bourbon has to be made in Kentucky. Has to be made in the United States.
Yeah.
About 95% of it's made in Kentucky.
Real quick, are you dealing with retaliatory tariffs?
Well, not so much. We're in all 50 states, and we're really...
You don't export that much?
We don't export that much just because we don't have the juice. Okay. We've grown at such a pace, as a lot of different bourbons have, that we don't really have enough supply to go ahead and penetrate other markets. But we're poised to do that, and I think we've got a great opportunity. So those tariffs certainly have hurt other people in the industry, but it's also created some opportunities. And I think going forward, there's going to be a lot of opportunities specifically in Asia.
All right. Trey Zoeller, Jefferson's Bourbon, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Talk to you soon.
Good stuff.